Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone. If you feel exhausted just trying to be yourself, it's not because you're broken, it's because you've been pretending for too long. Most people don't wake up one day and say, I think I'm burned out. They wake up thinking, something is wrong with me. They feel slower than they used to be, less motivated, more emotional, easily overwhelmed by things that once felt manageable. And instead of asking what happened to their energy, they ask what happened to their character. They assume they've become lazy, weak, ungrateful, or broken. But burnout rarely announces itself honestly. It wears the mask of personal failure. We live in a culture that praises endurance without asking what it costs. So when exhaustion arrives, we don't see it as a signal. We see it as a flaw. We don't say, I've been carrying too much for too long. We say, why can't I handle life like everyone else? And that question quietly turns tiredness into shame. The truth is, burnout doesn't come from doing nothing. It comes from doing too much while pretending you're fine. It comes from holding it together when you should have been allowed to fall apart, from showing up emotionally when your inner reserves were already empty, from being strong in rooms where it was never safe to be human. Burnout often grows in people who care deeply. People who don't quit easily, people who learned early that being dependable was the safest way to belong. So they push past their limits, not once, but habitually. They override their own signals. They ignore their own needs. And eventually, the body and the heart say what the mouth never felt allowed to say: enough. But instead of hearing that message with compassion, many people turn inward with blame. They tell themselves they should be better, tougher, more disciplined. They compare their inner exhaustion to other people's outer appearances and decide they've fallen behind. And slowly, quietly, the belief takes root. If I were stronger, this wouldn't be happening. That belief is heavy, heavier than the burnout itself. Because when you believe you're broken, you don't rest. You punish yourself. You push harder. You demand productivity from a nervous system that is already depleted. You silence your need for pause by calling it weakness, and the cycle deepens. What's often missing is awareness, the simple, brave act of naming what's actually happening, not diagnosing yourself as a failure, but recognizing the signs of prolonged emotional labor, the kind that doesn't show up on calendars or resumes, the kind that comes from constantly managing expectations, emotions, roles, and identities. Awareness sounds like this: I'm not failing at life. I'm exhausted from surviving it on hard mode. That shift matters, because when exhaustion is misnamed as brokenness, the solution becomes self-criticism. But when exhaustion is named honestly, the solution becomes care. There is nothing weak about realizing you're tired. There is nothing wrong with needing rest after years of holding everything together. Burnout is not a character defect. It's a signal that you've been strong for too long without support. And the moment you stop asking, what's wrong with me, and start asking, what does this cost me, something softens inside. That softness is not the end of strength. It's the beginning of healing. There is a quiet exhaustion that doesn't come from working too hard, but from pretending for too long. It's the kind of tiredness sleep doesn't fix. You can rest your body for hours and still wake up feeling heavy, foggy, and emotionally drained. That's because what's worn down isn't your schedule, it's your sense of self. Most pretending doesn't begin as dishonesty. It begins as protection. At some point, often very early, you learn that certain parts of you are too much, too sensitive, too emotional, or too inconvenient for the world around you. So you adapt. You soften your truth, you edit your feelings, you become agreeable, capable, calm, strong, whatever earns safety, approval, or belonging. And at first, it works. People praise you for being resilient. They rely on you. They admire how you handle everything so well. You become the one who doesn't need much, doesn't complain, doesn't fall apart. Over time, that role feels less like a choice and more like an obligation. You don't even notice when the performance starts running on autopilot. But pretending always has a cost. Every time you say, I'm fine, when you're not, you spend emotional energy. Every time you smile through discomfort, suppress anger, swallow grief, or ignore your own needs to keep the peace, you withdraw from an inner account that cannot replenish itself. You don't notice the depletion at first because you're still functioning. You're still showing up. You're still getting things done until one day you're not. The smallest tasks begin to feel overwhelming. Your patience shortens. Your joy feels muted. You become irritable with people you love and numb toward things that once mattered. And instead of recognizing this as exhaustion from emotional labor, you assume something is wrong with your motivation, your discipline, or your character. What's really happening is simpler and harder to admit. You've been living slightly out of alignment with yourself for a long time. Pretending requires constant self-monitoring. You're always scanning. Is this acceptable? Is this too much? Should I say this or stay quiet? Can I rest or do I need to prove my worth again today? That constant internal negotiation keeps your nervous system on high alert. It's not dramatic, but it's relentless. And the most dangerous part is how normal it feels. You don't think of it as pretending. You think of it as being mature, responsible, low maintenance, easy to be around. You tell yourself this is just what adulthood looks like, that everyone is tired, that wanting more ease, more honesty, more room to be human is unrealistic. So you keep going. And the gap between who you are and who you present as slowly widens. The body feels that gap before the mind does. It shows up as tension you can't relax, as headaches, tight chests, shallow breathing, as a constant sense of being on, even when you're alone. Your body knows you're holding something back, even if you don't have words for it yet. Emotionally, the cost is disconnection. From others, yes, but more painfully from yourself. When you repeatedly override your own feelings, you stop trusting them, you second-guess your reactions, you minimize your pain, you become a stranger to your own inner world. And loneliness grows, not because you're alone, but because you're unseen, even by yourself. This is where vulnerability begins to feel terrifying. Not because you don't want connection, but because you've built your life around not needing it. Letting your guard down feels like risking everything you've worked to maintain. If people see the real you, will they still stay? Will you still be valued? Will you still belong? So you keep pretending. And the burnout deepens. What most people don't realize is that burnout is often grief in disguise. Grief for the parts of yourself that never got air. Grief for the honesty you postponed. Grief for how long you've been carrying things alone. Pretending doesn't just exhaust you. It slowly erodes your sense of aliveness. You stop feeling deeply because feeling deeply feels dangerous. You stop wanting too much because wanting has taught you disappointment. You shrink your inner world to match what feels manageable, safe, controlled. But safety without truth becomes a cage. The turning point usually isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's the moment you realize you can't keep doing this. Not because you're weak, but because you're done abandoning yourself. You notice that the performance is costing you more than it's giving back. That approval without authenticity doesn't nourish you anymore. And for the first time, you consider a different question. Not, how do I fix myself? But where am I hiding from my own truth? That question is uncomfortable. It asks you to look at habits you once needed but no longer serve you. It asks you to acknowledge that pretending protected you once and that you're allowed to outgrow it. It asks you to risk small moments of honesty, even if your voice shakes. Vulnerability doesn't mean oversharing or falling apart publicly. Sometimes it's as simple as admitting quietly, this is hard, or choosing rest without justifying it, or telling someone you trust how you actually feel instead of how you think you're supposed to feel. Each of those moments returns a bit of energy to you, because every time you stop pretending, your nervous system gets the message that it's safe to stand down. Every time you honor your truth, you reclaim a piece of yourself that was locked away for survival. And slowly, the exhaustion begins to make sense. You realize you weren't tired because you weren't enough. You were tired because you were doing too much alone. Too much holding, too much managing, too much being what others needed. The relief doesn't come all at once, but it begins the moment you allow yourself to be real, even imperfectly, even inconsistently, even just for a moment, because the opposite of burnout isn't productivity. It's permission. Permission to be human. Permission to be honest, permission to stop pretending you're okay when you're not. And in that permission, something essential starts to return, your energy, your clarity, and the quiet feeling that you're finally on your own side again. Most of us carry a secret belief that being honest about our feelings is dangerous. We learn early that the world rewards toughness, composure, and resilience, and punishes the messy, complicated parts of being human. So we tuck away our fear, our sadness, our uncertainty, and present a polished version of ourselves to the world. That polished version becomes a shield, but also a cage. The irony is that the very shield we rely on to protect ourselves often becomes the source of our deepest fatigue. We are exhausted, not from what we do, but from what we hide. Every smile we force, every reassurance we offer when we are quietly crumbling inside, every "I'm fine" spoken when our heart is pounding in anxiety or grief costs us energy. It costs our attention. It costs the small but essential trust we hold with ourselves. Being vulnerable doesn't mean stepping into chaos or sharing everything with everyone. It means showing up with honesty in the spaces that matter. It means allowing the people who matter to see your true feelings without judgment, without performance. But that is terrifying because the inner critic whispers, if they see you, they won't like you. They might leave. They might think you are weak. And so we hesitate, hold back, and keep our truth behind locked doors. We forget that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the bridge to real connection. The moments we dare to be honest about how we feel, the moments we express our needs or admit our limits, are the moments we reclaim a part of ourselves we've been pretending doesn't exist. Vulnerability is the first act of courage because it asks us to be fully present with our humanity, without apology, without pretense. Our inner struggle is fear. Fear that our truth will be rejected, fear that our needs are too much, fear that if we let down the mask, we will lose the love, respect, or approval we have fought so hard to earn. We forget that hiding does not secure us. It isolates us. Pretending creates a surface of safety while the interior slowly erodes. Over time, this gap between who we are inside and who we present outside becomes unbearable. We feel tired, irritable, disconnected, anxious, and alone. And yet, even as the fear looms, the longing for connection, for authenticity, persists. Every quiet thought of wanting to be seen, every fleeting wish that someone would understand us as we are, is a spark that can ignite change. We can start small, admitting to ourselves how tired we feel, how hurt we are, how much we long for rest and understanding. That small act is the beginning of courage. Each moment of vulnerability is a subtle reclaiming of energy. It is saying, I exist as I am, and I deserve to be seen and heard. It is a refusal to continue the exhausting act of pretending. And the beautiful truth is that when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we often find the world responds not with judgment, but with empathy, and sometimes even with courage in return. There is no perfect way to practice vulnerability. It begins with noticing what we hide from ourselves and others, and gently testing the waters of honesty. It could be speaking up in a meeting about your real feelings, expressing frustration to a loved one without anger, admitting fear or uncertainty, or even journaling your truth in a private space. Each act teaches us that the world is not as threatening as we imagined, and that our strength grows in the space where we are real. Vulnerability is a muscle, and like any muscle, it strengthens with use. The first attempts are uncomfortable, but over time, honesty becomes easier. The fear diminishes, replaced with a quiet confidence rooted in self-trust. When we show up fully as ourselves, we stop running from life, and life stops running past us. The transformation comes gradually, but it is profound. We begin to understand that our exhaustion, our shame, our feelings of being too much were never indications that we were weak or broken. They were signals that we had been hiding ourselves too long. The moment we start letting our truth be seen, the tension inside begins to ease, the nervous system begins to settle, and we start to feel whole again. Ultimately, vulnerability is a declaration that we will no longer abandon ourselves for the comfort of others' approval, that we will no longer pretend we are fine when we are not, that we will face our fear and choose connection, courage, and authenticity over safety and avoidance. And in that choice, we discover a well of strength we did not know existed, a clarity that cuts through exhaustion, and a quiet freedom that makes life feel alive again. It is not a single act, but a lifelong practice, a gentle, steady return to oneself. And each small step of honesty is a victory, a reminder that our worth is not contingent on our ability to perform or hide, but on our capacity to show up fully as we are. Courage doesn't always arrive like a hero on a horse. It doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Most often, courage begins quietly in the spaces where no one is watching. It is a whisper that says, "I am going to keep showing up, even when I'm afraid." It is choosing to speak the truth, even when the words tremble. It is the small, steady refusal to shrink back from life, even when fear and doubt press in from every side. We often confuse courage with boldness or confidence, but true courage is not about never feeling fear. It is about acknowledging that fear is real, that our discomfort is valid, and still choosing to act. Many people avoid courage because they imagine it demands perfection, or that it must be dramatic to be meaningful. But courage is often subtle, quiet, and deeply personal. It's the courage to face yourself honestly, the courage to set boundaries you've avoided, the courage to say no to obligations that drain you and yes to things that nourish your soul. The inner struggle that courage confronts is complex. It asks us to stand in discomfort rather than run from it, to face judgment rather than avoid it, to choose authenticity over approval. That is not easy. Our nervous system is wired to seek safety. It whispers, "Keep quiet, don't risk this, just stay small." And we have spent a lifetime listening to that voice. It has kept us safe in countless ways. But the cost of listening too long is slow and quiet, emotional depletion, disconnection from ourselves, and the persistent feeling that something essential is missing. Courage, then, is the act of turning toward that discomfort. It is saying, "I will feel afraid, and I will move forward anyway." It might be admitting a mistake to someone who expects perfection, asking for help when you feel you should manage alone, or expressing a need that has been ignored for too long. Each of these actions may feel terrifying, but they are also life-giving. Each act of courage strengthens the bridge between who you are and who you want to be. The beauty of courage is that it compounds. The first time you speak a truth you've been holding back, the second time feels slightly easier. Each act proves to yourself that your inner fears, though loud, do not define your limits. Each boundary you set reinforces your sense of self-worth. Each moment you honor your needs, even when it feels uncomfortable, reminds you that your voice matters. Over time, courage becomes less about occasional heroic acts and more about consistent alignment with yourself. Courage is also intertwined with vulnerability. You cannot be truly courageous without showing yourself, at least in small ways, to the world as you are. To stand up for yourself, to ask for help, or to admit you are struggling, you must expose pieces of yourself that you have long hidden. And exposure, while frightening, is the soil in which resilience and growth take root. Without courage, your authenticity remains locked away, and your emotional exhaustion persists. Another dimension of courage is the willingness to embrace change. Courage doesn't always mean fixing everything immediately. Sometimes it means noticing what isn't working and making the choice to shift, even slowly. It might be choosing a different approach to relationships, work, or daily routines. It might be learning to rest when you once believed relentless effort was the only path to worth. The act of adjusting, of standing firm in the face of inertia, is courage in motion. The inner dialogue of courage is subtle but powerful. It sounds like, "I am allowed to protect my energy. I do not have to be everything to everyone. I can take small steps toward my truth and still survive." These thoughts counteract the familiar voice that says, "You must keep pretending. You must keep performing. You must not show weakness." Courage is the voice that quietly answers, "I have been strong enough. Now I will be honest with myself." Practicing courage daily transforms not only your experience of the world, but also your relationship with yourself. You begin to trust that you can face fear and still thrive. You begin to see that emotional discomfort is not a signal to withdraw, but an invitation to engage more fully with life. You begin to recognize that your strength is not measured by how much you endure silently, but by how authentically you show up despite the fear. And here's the subtle magic. Courage feeds back into itself. Every time you act despite fear, your nervous system learns safety in truth. Every time you honor your limits, your mind learns that your needs are valid. Every time you speak or act from alignment with your inner self, the gap between who you are and who you are pretending to be shrinks. The emotional exhaustion that once felt permanent begins to lift, replaced by a quiet, steady energy rooted in authenticity. Courage is not an endpoint. It is not something you achieve once and then move on. It is a daily practice, a choice made countless times in small, deliberate ways. It is the act of leaning into discomfort instead of away from it. It is the willingness to risk emotional exposure in order to live a life that feels real, meaningful, and fully your own. The profound lesson of courage is that it doesn't ask for perfection. It asks only for presence. It asks only that you stand in your truth, even when trembling. And the more you do, the more you discover that the life you feared was impossible to attain because it felt too risky is actually waiting on the other side of fear, quietly, patiently, ready to welcome you home. Courage transforms exhaustion into purpose, fear into clarity, and pretense into authenticity. It doesn't make life easy, but it makes life real. And when life is real, even the challenges become bearable because you no longer carry the weight of pretending. You are finally walking in alignment with who you are. And that alignment, however quiet or gradual, is one of the strongest forms of freedom there is. Growth is not a sudden arrival. It is a quiet unfolding, a steady accumulation of insight, courage, and honesty. It does not begin with dramatic transformations, but with small, consistent acts of truth. Each time you choose authenticity over pretense, each time you honor a boundary you once ignored, each time you give yourself permission to feel, to rest, to speak your truth, you are building the foundation of growth. It is subtle, often invisible to the outside world, yet it reshapes your inner life in ways that are profound and lasting. For so long, many of us confuse growth with doing more, achieving more, or becoming more. We imagine that becoming stronger means taking on additional responsibilities, pushing harder, or excelling beyond what anyone else expects. But true growth is different. It is not measured in productivity or accolades. It is measured in alignment, in the space where your inner life and your outward actions match. Growth is when you stop running from your own feelings and start listening to them. When you no longer chase approval as a measure of worth, when you allow yourself to be fully, imperfectly human. The inner struggle of growth is the persistent fear that slowing down, pausing, or changing direction might make you inadequate, irresponsible, or unworthy. It is the voice that whispers, if I stop pretending, people will see I'm not enough. This fear is familiar because we have listened to it for years. We have treated it as truth. But growth begins when we recognize that fear is only a sign that something inside is ready to shift. The discomfort is not a warning to stay small. It is a signal that the next step of alignment is waiting for us. To embrace growth, we must first recognize what pretending has cost us. We must notice the exhaustion, the irritability, the muted joy, and the subtle disconnection from ourselves. We must see that these experiences are not permanent flaws, but messages that our inner life has been neglected. Growth begins when we stop blaming ourselves for being tired, for being emotional, or for struggling. It begins when we accept that our inner world deserves attention, care, and respect. The journey toward growth is both inward and outward. Inwardly, it requires self-reflection, honesty, and compassion. We must face the patterns we have followed that no longer serve us, the habits of overextending, people-pleasing, and suppressing feelings. We must be willing to ask hard questions. What am I pretending about? What have I ignored? What parts of myself have I left unclaimed? These questions are not meant to induce guilt, but to illuminate the path forward. They are the compass for the life we are ready to live. Outwardly, growth requires action, small, consistent, deliberate choices that honor our inner truth. It may be the courage to set a boundary with someone who has taken too much, the decision to rest without justifying it, or the act of speaking honestly when the instinct is to remain silent. Each choice reinforces the connection between who we are and how we live. Each choice builds trust with ourselves, showing us that our needs, feelings, and limits matter. Growth is also the gentle practice of self-forgiveness. It is recognizing that every time we have pretended, hidden, or pushed through exhaustion, we did so with the intention of surviving. There is no shame in past survival strategies. Growth asks us not to erase those experiences, but to honor them as necessary steps that have brought us to this moment of awareness. We forgive ourselves for doing what we thought was required, and we choose now to do differently with intention and care. As we continue to practice growth, we begin to notice subtle shifts. The small victories accumulate. A moment of honest expression, a day without overextending, a refusal to apologize for existing fully. These moments are not insignificant. They are the building blocks of transformation. Each one signals that we are reclaiming the energy, the clarity, and the authenticity that were eroded by pretending. They remind us that life is not meant to be endured in quiet desperation, but to be lived in alignment with our truth. Growth ultimately leads to a kind of homecoming. It is the process of returning to ourselves after years of living in survival mode. It is the recognition that we are not broken, that we do not need to be fixed, and that the exhaustion we once felt was a signal, not a verdict. As we embrace our authentic selves, we find that we are capable of living with more ease, more joy, and more connection. The courage we cultivated and the vulnerability we practiced converge to create a life that feels real, meaningful, and aligned. And perhaps most importantly, growth teaches us that we are not alone. When we stop pretending, we invite others to do the same. We model honesty, courage, and authenticity. We give permission, silently and profoundly, for the people around us to also step out of masks, to speak their truth, and to honor their inner lives. Growth is contagious in the quietest way, creating ripples that extend far beyond our own experience. The path of growth is ongoing. It does not end at a single milestone or achievement. It is a lifelong commitment to being awake to our feelings, to honoring our limits, to choosing authenticity over approval, and to cultivating courage in the face of fear. It is a gentle, steady return to ourselves, moment by moment, choice by choice. In embracing this path, we discover a resilience that is deep, a peace that is enduring, and a freedom that cannot be taken away. The freedom of living fully as who we are, without apology, without pretense, without fear. Growth is not something added to us, it is something remembered. It is the reclamation of energy, authenticity, and joy that has always been within us, waiting for permission to emerge. Each act of honesty, each step toward alignment, each moment of courage is a reclaiming of life itself. And in the end, the person who emerges is not the one who did everything perfectly or endured endlessly, but the one who chose to show up consistently and bravely as their real self every single day.